Hello, everyone. Welcome to Censored2Celebrated. My name is Melita Noel Cantu, and I am so happy to be here with all of you today. It's April 2015, and I'm here with my guest, Kate McCombs, and here she is, sexuality educator, joining us today from New York City. And just to share a little bit about Kate. So Kate has her MPH and is a New York-based sex educator, New York City based sex educator and speaker who's geeky about empathy and connection. And I can tell you, we've been talking a lot about this. So I'm super excited to talk more about empathy and connection, sex and feelings, and how she works with all of that. For her, ultimately, all of her work is about helping people feel more comfortable talking about sex and feelings. She believes that meaningful conversations and accurate information can help us create a healthier and more joy-filled world. And that's something I really resonate with. So I'm excited to talk about that. So the way that she kind of does this in the world is she writes articles, she facilitates workshops, all about how to build amazing relationships. And you can certainly find out more about her at her website, katemccombs.com, katemccombs.com. And without further ado, welcome, Kate. So glad to have you here.
Hi there. I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you. Well, let's get right going. I know we're having a few technical difficulties, but I think everything's working out now. And let's just get started. Can you start by telling us a little something about how you got into this field of diverse sexuality and gender and sexuality education?
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of start from the beginning, like a lot of sex educators, I was that friend in my group of friends who always had just a little bit more accurate sex education than my friends had. So I was the go-to person when they were getting their periods or when they had questions about puberty, even when I was as young as like 10 years old. My mom was an amazing sex educator for me, and it was super important for her that I had really good sex education. She grew up without a mom. Her mom died when she was quite young, so she didn't get that information. Her father was quite kind of his generation. Like, he did his best. He gave her some books, but there was none of that kind of best practice parent-child communication around sexuality. So it was really important to her that I got that open communication. So I could explain what fallopian tubes were when I was 7.
Wow.
and that was just my normal. So when the older I got, the more I realized that these conversations weren't happening in my friends' homes. And when they had questions inevitably about how their bodies were changing, I was able to give them the accurate information that I was getting from my mom. So then as I got older, their questions appropriately became more about things like safer sex, masturbation, pleasure, things like that. And then when I got to college and realized that this was an actual job, it was totally the logical next step that I would do this for work. It always brought so much joy to my life to make spaces for these kinds of conversations to be happening. And so it was just a natural fit. And then I discovered the wonderful world of peer education. And that was where I got my first kind of official role as a sex educator. So I excitedly applied to to UC Berkeley's peer education program and got in, and that totally opened up my world, because then I was doing it in an official capacity rather than just in these one-on-one ways. And then I became a trainer for the program, and I trained new peer educators, and I met an amazing mentor through that program. And she taught me basically the business side of sex ed and how to make a career out of it.
Wow. So it's interesting that it seems like for many of us, it starts as a personal connection, and for you is in your family, which I'm not sure how common that is. So in your sense, just in talking to other sexuality educators and people in the field, is that common that it comes kind of as a family thing first?
It's, in my just personal observation, it seems to be either they grew up with great sex ed, or they grew up in a really kind of repressive environment. Like, they grew up Catholic and like in Catholic school their whole life, and then they kind of burst out of their shell and discovered sexuality. Or it was they grew up with the kind of environment that I grew up with, where accurate information was readily available, and they used that to kind of fuel their career.
Yeah, it's interesting. I hadn't thought much about that, because my experience is much more like yours, and so it'd be interesting to know. And I know there's a book that Karen Rain edited, and she was my guest a couple months ago, talking about different stories, and that's going to be my summer reading. I'm really excited to learn more about different stories. And I will put the link up for that again for those of you who may not have seen it yet. So in this field, we have an alphabet soup, and there's been a lot of conversation about the L, the G, the B, the T, the Q, the plus, the I, the A, kind of how many letters can we add to this alphabet soup around identity. And I tend to use the term diverse sexuality and gender just because it feels a little bit more expansive to me. But what are you encountering these days? What's kind of the manifestation of the alphabet soup that makes the most sense in your work?
What I see people using most often in my world is LGBT. But when I was living in Australia, that's where I went to grad school, they most often used sex and gender diverse, which it sounds more similar to what you prefer to use as well, which I like also, because that feels more kind of holistic and descriptive as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I tend to use the language of whatever environment I'm in to be most readily understood and most respectful.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think it becomes a challenge when we're in the social media world.
Right.
It's one thing where you really know who your audience is, but then when you're trying to work on social media or maybe in your writing, I think it makes sense to use the most commonly accepted terms, but they're so contested that it's always interesting to me to know what people decide to do in all their different areas that they're working in. Great. Well, I know you've had done a lot of work with different events, different projects that you're working on. What's kind of a favorite moment or aha moment that you've had recently during an event or conference that you've attended?
Well, recently I was teaching at an event for Planned Parenthood in New York City. They run an annual Let's Talk About Sex event that is incredibly fun, and I feel the kind of center of my work is entirely about helping people feel more comfortable talking about sex, because I feel like everything from pleasure to health to well-being, it all centers around being able to comfortably talk about this stuff. So I taught a workshop on how to get more comfortable talking about sex. And one of the questions that I got after the official part of the workshop was, how do I define sex positive? And I thought this was really interesting. And I get asked this often. The way I answer it is that I definitely define myself as being sex positive, but not sex mandatory. And this, I think, is really key. And what I found interesting was just how this audience responded to that, and how much that landed with them in a positive way. Because I think the term sex positive is often co-opted to mean more sex is inherently good.
Yes.
And, as someone who teaches about sexuality, all of my work is about sexuality. And it's easy, I think, because it's something that can bring a lot of people pleasure, to kind of paint it with a broad brush as being this inherently positive thing, when in fact, for a lot of people, it's not always a positive thing. It's very nuanced.
Yes.
And then, of course, like with the larger alphabet soup, with people who are asexual or who choose to be celibate, for me, my definition of sex positivity would be inclusive of people for whom sexuality was either something that didn't resonate with them for whatever reason, or where they were choosing to not practice it. I think that it's important for a sex positive world to also include an attitude that sexuality can be a really wonderful, positive thing, and is certainly not something that should be inherently shameful, but having a more nuanced attitude about it as a whole.
Well, and it's a good point. Just this idea of understanding the nuance and the gray and the complexity, and that's something that it just seems in this world there's and in this field there's a lot of like us and them, white and black and gray, and there's not always a lot of conversation about the gray. There's all dichotomous, and I think Sally even brought this up in one of her comments of let's be careful about those dichotomies, because that's not really representative of sexuality, which is such a complicated thing, or gender, which again is such a complicated thing. So I think it's a really good point to make. And I know you're working on a lot of different projects right now, and the Sex Geekdom and Desire Map and Teen Empathy. And I'm just wondering, what would you like to share with us today that you're working on that you're super excited about?
Oh, so many things.
Yes, I know. We talked a lot about all of them.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll share a little bit about what Sex Geekdom is.
That'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah. So Sex Geekdom is something that I started in 2012 when I was living in Australia, when I was toward the end of the time that I was a grad student there. And it basically started out of me wanting this thing to exist. Essentially, Sex Geekdom is a international community for people like me who are geeky about sex. And there are Sex Geekdom hubs all over the world now. It started as just a meetup in Melbourne, Australia, where I invited all of the local sex geeks that I knew, like sex researchers, people who worked in public health, people who worked in sex toy retail, erotica writers, anyone that I knew that worked in a sex-related space, I invited to a meetup to come hang out and just have shared reality over wanting to have intellectual, meaningful discussions about sex. And people really liked it.
Wow.
And then it became kind of a thing. So now we have hubs all over the world. And it's really meaningful to me that this thing that I started is now inspiring these conversations that can happen in other places and, are being run by people who I've never met in real life, which is really kind of amazing to me.
So how does someone decide to start it? How did they get advice from you or connect with you about how to start one in their town or city or neighborhood?
Yeah, so we have a website, sexgeekdom.com.
Okay.
And on the Find a Meetup page at the bottom, there's directions on how to get the ball rolling to start a meetup. There's a survey that you do to get the ball rolling, like asking questions about what kind of a meetup you might want to start. And then we have an how to be an emissary guide. So we could call the people who run these meetups emissaries. And that's something that I created with the first beta tester emissaries. We put together this how to be an emissary guide based on their experiences of running successful meetups. So that's been something that's been useful to the new emissaries as they have rolled out their hubs.
Nice. Okay. And can you describe what does like a typical Sex Geekdom meetup look like? And like,
it's amazing.
There food? Is there what is it?
What's amazing about them is how diverse they are. So some of them are just like a happy hour style drinks where just, hey, sex geeks here and at this specific time at this bar. And they'll just meet up and know that you can have conversations about the latest research on non-monogamous relationships or chlamydia and know that nobody's going to think you're weird for talking about this stuff.
Got it.
Or sometimes they're more elaborate, like the Sex Geekdom Chicago people have been really enthusiastic about these sex geek themed scavenger hunts in the museums there.
Wow, that's a great idea. As a lover of scavenger hunts, I'm very into going to Chicago right about now.
Yeah, we did one in New York too. It was really, really fun. Some of the hubs have done trivia nights, or one hub did a knitting circle. Sometimes they do more educational style events or discussion groups around a particular topic.
Okay.
So they're all really different. And the part of our kind of philosophy is to give autonomy to the emissaries to kind of determine what their hub really wants, because it varies regionally.
Wow, that's what a great idea, and how neat to think that it's expanded. And you just started in 2012.
Yeah.
Oh, very, very nice. Okay. This is my favorite question because it's about Censored2Celebrated. And really in your life, either professionally or personally or both, what's a time you've felt censored and then really been able to move that feeling and shift it towards feeling more celebrated?
Yeah. I think, I've been extremely lucky to get to inhabit a lot of really sex positive spaces where I felt really accepted for who I am and what I'm about and how I want to exist in the world. One example where I felt this in kind of a surprising way was actually in academia. When I was doing my Master's of Public Health, I did my final research project on pleasure-inclusive sex education. So one of my memories of doing this, the first time we discussed what our projects were going to be within my department, there was a small group of us that were doing research projects seated around a table, and we were all going around saying what we were going to do our projects on, and other people were saying things like, I'm going to do something about malaria, or I'm going to do something about nutrition, and then got to me saying something about pleasure-inclusive sex education, and it was almost funny, also because of the specificity of it. And one of the other students kind of looked at me really strangely and said, what do you mean? Like the Kama Sutra? Like she just made this really snide comment to me, and it was very, like, she was very much trying to make fun of me. And it was kind of shocking. And I felt very shut down. And but I said no, and I explained like some examples from the literature of what I meant by pleasure inclusive sex education. Like examples of safer sex methods being taught with a pleasure inclusive approach, like teaching about how to use lubricant in pleasure inclusive ways, and
pleasure inclusive ways. Okay.
Yeah.
That's something that we're just getting the comment of, just to really, you're using some terms that I don't think have been used all that much. So to just be really clear with your terms, because they're great. And we also got a comment that the word emissary was very interesting to one of our guests, Jenna. She really liked that term. Anyway, just to kind of give you that note that a lot of this is really groundbreaking. And with your story, that's also very clear that this is someone who's like, what are you talking about? The Kama Sutra? What is this? Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I recognize that part of the whole thing with sex and feelings is about linguistic precision. Like, people don't often have the language to describe what they want, what they need, how they're feeling. And without that language, you can feel really lost. And when you're learning that language, it can also feel really uncomfortable. Like it can feel awkward or embarrassing. I totally get that. That's a big part of the process. But yeah, so I was explaining these examples, and she was just kind of not really responding to it. I mean, the professor knew what my interests were, and he was very supportive. But anyway, so the fast forward, I guess it was almost 9 months later, right after we'd all given our final presentations on our theses. We were all at a pub, as you do in Australia after you finish a major research project. And she came up to me and she's like, I think I said something really nasty to you that first day. And I was like, oh, yeah, I think I remember that. And she's like, I wanted to apologize, because what that was really about for me was that I'm really uncomfortable talking about sex. Like, she's like, in this whole public health program, I didn't take any of the sexuality related classes. And I'm just really uncomfortable talking about sex. And I think I just reacted to what you were saying. But after seeing your presentation, I totally get what this is about and how important it is.
Yeah.
And then she bought me a drink and we hugged. It was really nice.
I'm so glad that she was able to really own that. And it wasn't just on you to celebrate. She was able to celebrate with you ultimately, and herself, saying, you know what, this was really hard for me. And now I'm moving myself from censorship to celebration around this topic. And I got a little bit of sexuality education even when I didn't think I wanted it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's really important for me to remember too, and like to not take it personally when people sometimes react negatively to a message that I'm bringing, that it's not always like, it's not necessarily about me. I mean, one of the things I've learned from my career is that nobody is neutral to sex. It can bring up so much emotion for people. Even if it's positive emotion, it's really emotionally charged.
So with all of that, and because this is also something that we talked about a little bit, and I know we have some other empathy geeks on the line, tell me a little bit more about how tea and empathy came about, and was it as a way to address that sexuality brings up a lot of emotion in us, positive, negative, kind of the whole mix?
Yeah, I mean, I think empathy is like learning how to give really clear and high quality empathy, I think, is such a foundational skill to really showing up in all of our relationships, not just our romantic and sexual ones. And I frequently think about how there's kind of a gap between how people really want to show up in their lives and the skills that they actually have to show up in that way. And I've taken a lot of classes in how to show up with more empathy. And I think empathy is often talked about as this sort of ephemeral thing that you're either kind of born with or not born with. And you know, I mean, I think you could debate that all day long, but I think I believe that it's a skill that can be harnessed and developed, and like that there are specific skill sets around it that can be nurtured. I mean, obviously there are people that have things wrong with their brain where they can't be fully empathic, but I think the overwhelming majority of people can harness their empathy skills. So I started something called tea and empathy parties. I started having these in my home because I recognized this need among my group of friends, other sex educators and professionals. In New York City, it's this incredibly vibrant city with so many people. And what I noticed is that people were longing for a particular kind of connection. And it wasn't just something that could be met either by their intimate relationships or these kind of networky kind of events that are really common here. So the way a tea and empathy party works is that people come to the event. The way they work in my home is that I have tea and people get their special little mug of tea, and then we sit around and I do a little empathy workshop, like explaining what empathy is, what empathy isn't. And then I lead them through this skills-based activity with these cards that are based on nonviolent communication. And we break into smaller groups and actually get to practice real empathy. It's not like a empathy role play, it's like a real play. Like people actually share examples of what's something that's emotionally alive in them and then get empathy from the other people in their groups. So it's something that people leave the empathy parties feeling like they feel, what they've told me is they feel emotionally lighter. Like it doesn't fix anything. It doesn't dramatically change their life, but they feel lighter and they feel better equipped to deal with the situations that they're dealing with in their life because they feel like that burden is not all up in here. It's like, it's clearer to them.
Right. So, well, it sounds really powerful, and it sounds like you've mainly done this with adults, and we're getting a comment of empathy needs to be taught in schools. Is there a way to do tea and empathy parties in schools? Have you heard of that happening at all? And have you done any work with youth around this?
Yeah, so I don't teach youth, I teach college students. I've done this activity with college students and it's gone over extremely well. Almost to my surprise, when you get cis male straight students coming up to me telling me how much they love this activity, like, you know, you're on the right track with something.
Yeah. Wow.
I think with college students, you know, in my experience, the thing that I have to do with the activity is just really scaffold it to make sure that the disclosures when they're in their small group are appropriate to the safe space that I'm able to create. Like I usually scaffold it as, you know, share things that are part of the universal college experience, frustrations with your classes, things related to transitioning to college life. Like this is probably not the space to disclose your deepest, darkest trauma. Like just giving examples so that it can be contained within the space that I can create.
Yeah. Well, and I like how that acknowledges that people may have those really deepest, darkest secrets or things, but this maybe isn't the space to talk about them. But I like that you acknowledge that. And I wonder, that's empathy in itself, right? And I wonder if, do you offer resources then that if stuff does come up, that they can get some support for that?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And there definitely are a number of organizations that are doing empathy in schools. The Start Empathy Project, I know, is doing empathy in schools.
How do you spell that? Start Empathy?
Yeah, Start Empathy.
Start Empathy, okay.
And then there's a program called Roots of Empathy that I know is doing a lot of work in Canada and I think other countries as well. I think it started in Canada.
Okay. Yeah, we're getting some comments about this. Sounds like a mix of emotional intelligence workshops and the innovative, often radical consciousness raising groups from the 60s and 70s. Yeah, I agree, Sally. That makes a lot of sense to me. Does that sound familiar to you too, Kate?
Yes, it's also, I often talk a lot with my mom about how a lot of things with sex and with feelings, like things are repackaged, but nothing's new. Like, you know, I think it's important for my generation to acknowledge that even when we come up with things independently, like that there's often roots of these things that we might not have heard of, but that, you know, there are definitely similarities that we have to honor of generations in the past, like doing things really well.
Yeah. Oh, it's so true. So true. And I remember my mom going to one of those CR groups in the 70s, Sally. So I'm right there with you. It sounds it does sound like a really great repackaging for what we're doing or for what's happening now and making it kind of very relevant and giving it a new package and a snazzy new name can help, I guess. And so what I want to do is just acknowledge that this has been great, you know, and talking with you has been great. And I know we do have a private after party chat. with some folks and who will be coming in. I'll be sending them the link when we get off the air with this public webcast. But I do want to put the invitation out there since we do have a few extra spots. If someone listening today is able to stay for another 20 minutes or so and would like to be invited to that, please raise your hand in the comment section. I'm happy to send you an invite. And of course, in the future, you can get in on those first when you sign up for my email list. And I just wanted to ask you, Kate, just as we wrap up, you've mentioned your mom, you've mentioned the Sex Geekdom Emissaries. Are these folks who inspire you? Are there other folks who inspire you in your work around diverse sexuality and gender? Who are your inspirations?
Oh gosh, I am so spoiled for inspiration. I mean, my mom inspires me constantly. I mean, she not only because of the sex education that she gave me, but because of the fact that she was an entrepreneur that built her whole career was around education and speaking. It wasn't around sex education. She taught teachers how to be better teachers, which has been hugely beneficial for me when I have questions about pedagogy.
Absolutely.
And she's retired now, but is incredibly supportive to me. And the Sex Geekdom Emissaries, I mean, this incredibly diverse group of people, like age diverse, sexuality diverse, gender diverse, ethnically diverse people all over the world who are spending, like nobody's getting paid to do this, are spending time to promote meaningful conversations about sex. It's the thing that people want. Like it's, because most of us, I mean, often in my workshops, I will ask how many people got sex education in school and how many of you felt like that sex education prepared you for your adult sex life? And pretty much nobody ever says yes to the second question. You know, so it's the value of having these spaces to not just learn, to connect with other adults about getting comfortable with this language, so it doesn't feel so awkward when we're having these conversations in our private lives.
Yeah, oh, that's great. It is really inspiring. And you may have mentioned this, but I know we're in the US, and where are some of the locations that are maybe a little bit more far flung from the US that there are some sex geekdom hubs?
Well, there's a Sex Geekdom hub in Puebla, Mexico. There's several in Australia.
Okay.
And there's several in Canada now. There's one developing in Sweden.
Neat.
Yeah. I mean, the first time I ever saw Sex Geekdom, one of the Sex Geekdom emissary in Mexico translated all the materials. We have 4 Sex Geekdom essential values, and she translated them all into Spanish. And that was amazing to me to like see something that I'd created be translated. And so at some point they'll be translated into Swedish as well, which will totally delight me.
Great. Oh my gosh, that's it's so exciting to think that that's something that just kind of organically emerged out of conversation has turned into something that's across multiple continents now. That's really neat. Well, oh my gosh, we are at time. It's 1:30, and I do want to honor that we're doing an after party private chat. So I want to invite the folks to that. And I do want to just make sure we thank you, Kate. Thank you to the audience for joining us and for all your great comments and questions. And Kate, can you just let us know what the best way to get in touch with you via social media would be?
Yeah, absolutely. So one way to get a hold of me is through my website. I have a contact page on there. On Twitter, I'm KateCom, KATECOM. And on Instagram, I'm Kate Answers.
Great. All right. Well, thank you again, Kate. And we are going to go quiet into the green room and have our after party chat. And I just wanted to say for everybody who joined us today, I look forward to seeing you in May. We'll have another awesome guest then, and I'll be announcing that soon. And until then, celebrate all the people in your life. I'm sure they need it. We all need it. So thank you, Kate. Thanks, everybody. And
thanks for having me.
Yes, and we'll be on the line to have the folks join us in a moment. Here we go. I'm stopping the broadcast. Bye, everybody.
Bye.